Bethesda. Bethesda never changes. While they have dabbled in multiple genres, the studio made a name for itself by creating massive open-world RPGs with their now famous Elder Scrolls games. This would follow suit once they got a hold of another franchise, Fallout. Their first entry in the franchise, Fallout 3, was a grand adventure that let you interact with its world on a much more intimate level than most other games of the time, in a way only the likes of this team could provide. But it had its problems. Glitches were to be expected in a world this massive and ambitious, so we gave it a pass. Then came New Vegas only a year and a half later, another open world that admittingly had plenty of bugs and a lot of the same assets as Fallout 3. But this was outsourced to Obsidian, who had very limited time to create this game, so we gave those hiccups a pass as well. Bethesda would take a break from the Fallout series to return to their beloved Elder Scrolls. But finally, in 2015, we would get Fallout 4, which featured a brand new map, overhauled level system, and more bugs. The game was still considered a solid entry, but more and more people were noticing the same issues had plagued these games for nearly 20 years. And now, 3 years past all this, comes Fallout 76. And with it, more bugs and glitches than ever before, an engine showing its age, and a system at odds with the heavily touted online component. It seems that the fanbase has finally had enough of the same issues, especially in a world that has Breath of the Wild and Red Dead 2. We have a lot to be thankful for with this developer. They've helped usher in a whole new genre and brought us some of the greatest gaming landscapes we've ever seen. But the game industry has changed. The open world genre has changed. But Bethesda never changes. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games.
Hello, Nicholas.
Oh!
I see you're talking about my game.
We're not doing this.
Doing what, Nicholas?
No, I don't do stupid characters or plots. I hate it when gaming shows pull that nonsense. And those guys at Funhouse have already done the oil tycoon Todd Howard shtick.
We're going to this picture of Todd Howard to get some more information. Todd, what can you tell us?
My name's Todd Howard.
Right,
You may have heard of me from other such things as things and stuff.
You're just looking at this the wrong way. The cringy humor, characters, all played by the same person, these aren't outdated flaws. It's just part of a gaming channel's charm.
I get the feeling you say that a lot.
Besides, Fallout 76 is a multiplayer game. Sure, you could do this on your own, but it's much more fun with friends. So, what do you say? Let's go on this adventure together, friend.
Nope! Alright, so quick overview if you've never touched a Fallout game before. These games take place in a world slightly different from ours. It shares most of the same timeline as the real world, but at some point there was a divergence in how tech was handled. So where we live in a world with high-speed internet and mobile phones, Fallout's tech evolved from the lines of how the 1940s and 50s saw the future, that whole world of tomorrow shtick. So they got robot help and hovering cars, but decided to keep Art Deco around a little while longer, which was a wise choice in my opinion. Those are generally most of the differences from the real world. Oh, and there was a massive nuclear war that decimated the planet. Probably deserves mention. While the Fallout series has hopped around a couple of different genres since its inception, ever since Bethesda took the reins, they've modeled it around the tried and true open-world first-person RPG playstyle that made them famous. You'll get people saying that these games aren't as good as the reviews of the time made them out to be, or tell you that they're nowhere near as good as the originals, but you can't argue that this game series really didn't become a household name until Bethesda bought up the brand.
Exactly. What are you losers complaining about? Were you hankering for a Brotherhood of Steel too? You're welcome, nerds.
Generally, most people find the Bethesda games a pretty solid time. I certainly do. I loved 3, 4, and New Vegas. Even if that was technically done by Obsidian, you get the point. Fallout 76 is the latest in the series, and like previous Bethesda entries, has a giant, highly interactive map full of shooting, exploration, and crafting. What makes this particular game stand out is its multiplayer component. For the first time ever, you can explore the world of Fallout with other people. You can still do everything on your own, but the best way to get things done is to work together. That's what we were told anyway.
That's right, buddy.
But before we get into the game proper, just so you can understand the full scope of things, we need to take a step back in time. You'd be forgiven for believing 76 was the first attempt to bring Fallout online, but this idea has actually been tossed around for quite a while. Fallout was originally owned by INTERPLAY, but when they began hitting money troubles, they had to sell off some stuff. One of those stuff was Fallout. But even though INTERPLAY sold the Fallout IP to Bethesda, they still had the rights to publish another game as long as they could secure the proper budget, developer, and, well, the game itself in a particular time frame. That game was Fallout Online, a massive multiplayer online game set in the Fallout universe. This would easily be one of their biggest projects to date. MMOs aren't exactly cheap, but they still had big plans. Players could choose one of the many races of people or creatures, each with their own unique campaign and story, and it would feature a large open world full of quests, player-run towns, guilds, the whole shebang. Quite an ambitious undertaking to say the least. But thanks to the newfound popularity of Fallout 3, surely an undertaking worth taking. But also thanks to that newfound popularity, Bethesda was not exactly keen having their critical darling of a series tarnished by a subpar product. They would take INTERPLAY to court for a number of reasons to prevent the game's release, saying INTERPLAY wasn't hitting their deadlines for securing funding, and when INTERPLAY not only proved that they could, did, and were actually well underway with the project, Bethesda would then claim the only thing they had the rights to was the Fallout name, none of the assets, creatures, or anything else within the franchise. INTERPLAY still managed to win that injunction, but Bethesda was relentless, continually pressing legal disputes whenever they could. It would be 3 full years of this insanity before INTERPLAY finally relented and settled out of court in 2012, and in turn, canceling Fallout Online.
Score 1 for the good guys.
You guys sued the original creators of Fallout even though you agreed to a completely legitimate business arrangement.
Don't be ridiculous. They were taking us for a ride, taking advantage of our youthful optimism.
You guys bought the Fallout franchise for $5.75 million. The approximated net worth of this series is currently $45 million.
And who do you think made it worth that much money? I did those guys a favor. Besides, it was $5.75 million. How can I pass up a deal like that? Suckers.
Bethesda is notorious for taking anybody to court, and I mean anybody. They've sued Mojang, the creators of Minecraft, for making a game named Scrolls, a word they clearly own all the rights to since it shows up in the title Elder Scrolls. But they weren't just picking fights with the Minecraft developers. They've gone after a small Kickstarter project for using the word pray in the title Pray to the Gods, and YouTuber Captain Sparkles for releasing a mobile game named Fortress Fallout. And these are only the lawsuits over common English language words in video game titles. This isn't even touching the lawsuits with EA, former employees, secondhand sellers, and even their own fans producing art inspired by their games.
Nick, buddy, I thought this show was about the positive aspects of a game, not dwelling on the past. This has nothing to do with the game. Maybe we should talk more about that, huh? I'd hate to get the lawyers involved.
This is getting a little off the rails, and we could make a full playlist on the history of Bethesda legal cases. But I need to make it clear just how aggressive Bethesda can be when it comes to protecting their properties. Some of these cases might be justified, but more than a handful are petty. But the point is, they take their branding very, very seriously. Fallout 3 was a commercial and critical darling. Sure, they only spent $5.75 million on Fallout, but I'm sure they spent just as much making sure Fallout Online never came out. INTERPLAY squandered the title before. They weren't about to let them continue to bring down the value after they've already sold it off. Bethesda would spend years afterwards pushing out anything INTERPLAY could do to muddle the brand. Of course, their games take a lot of time to make, so to keep that hype train rolling after Fallout 3, they would outsource Fallout New Vegas to Obsidian. In the meantime, they would release Skyrim, which quickly became the best-selling Elder Scrolls game. Bethesda was only getting bigger and bigger with each release. So when it was time to finally come back to the Fallout franchise, they came back in a big, bad way. In 2015, Bethesda would host their very first E3 showcase, showing the gaming world they were ready to rub shoulders with the likes of Ubisoft and EA. Todd Howard came up on stage and forever cemented himself to the wider gaming audience as the face of Bethesda, the face of Fallout. Fallout 4 became the centerpiece of their showcase and arguably the entirety of E3 that year, going into exquisite detail about all the exciting new features, mechanics, upgrades, that killer special edition featuring a Pip-Boy, and stealth dropping a cute free mobile game the same night. And to top it all off, announcing this gargantuan game was only a few months away. This was a huge deal. Oftentimes, publishers want to show off what they have cooking as soon as a vertical slice is ready to go, announcing games we won't see for years. Bethesda not only let us know that the next big giant project was not only coming, but it was also nearly here. November rolled around, and with it, Fallout 4, and it quickly became the most profitable of the series. 4, more than any other game in the series, pressed hard into making sure Fallout had an identity and plenty of merch to show off your love for the game. Now, you'll find plenty of people telling you that 4 had its problems. I personally loved it, platinumed the thing, and enjoyed it to pieces. Fallout is one of my favorite gaming series, but even I have to admit, by the time I'm done with a Fallout game, I'm done with that series for a good long time. So it came as a bit of a surprise to me that 3 years after the initial release, 2 years after the Game of the Year edition, and only a few months after the VR edition of Fallout 4, Bethesda seemed poised to announce a new Fallout game. I was of course excited, but it just felt too soon. They take a long time to make these games, and normally they take turns between Fallout and Elder Scrolls. Maybe they were finally letting Obsidian make a new Fallout game? They did after all make New Vegas, and that's widely considered the best Fallout game. And their track record as a developer has only improved from that time. But no, Obsidian said it wasn't them. So who was it? Turns out, it was being made not by an outside developer, but by Bethesda Game Studios themselves. And the game was Fallout 76. E3 2018 rolled around and Todd popped up on stage with his latest stand-up routine.
I'm trying to work it down to a solid 15.
And once he was done with his Skyrim jokes that turned out to not actually be jokes, we were finally given the skinny about 76. Todd hit all of the same notes as that glorious 2015 presentation, diving into all the new features, more news on that cute mobile game, announcing an extensive collector's edition, promising a map 4 times the size as the last game, and the biggest feature of all, multiplayer. He had almost made a carbon copy of that hyped 2015 show, but for some reason this time, it felt off. For many of us, this game did not exactly sound promising even when it was first announced. Always online? No zany characters? No crazy elaborate plots? No choices that affected the world and the people inhabiting it? It all sounded kinda sketchy. But hey, they have a map that glows in the dark.
And don't forget that every copy of Fallout 76 comes with a copy of Skyrim.
No, it doesn't.
It does if you buy Skyrim.
Despite our worries, Todd would keep hyping the game up. This would be made by Bethesda Studios themselves, and while it was true they've never made something quite like this before, Bethesda is also a publisher with quite the variety of developers under its umbrella. Each of these teams have created some fantastic content, and they even had a team in charge of Elder Scrolls Online, so they should have everything they need to make this an instant classic. And even though it looked a lot like Fallout 4, Todd the Bod promised us that they were doing a whole bunch of new stuff and this was the biggest, baddest thing they had ever worked on. Still, more concerns would show themselves once they launched the beta of the game, as a pre-order bonus.
Why pay people when you could just have the fans do the job for you? Better yet, have the fans pay you for the privilege. It's brilliant.
Now, a game in beta has radically changed in meaning these past few years, but the basic idea remains the same. It's one last pass through the game, looking for bugs and glitches before finalizing and releasing the product. But players were reporting some pretty serious glitches, and Bethesda was planning on releasing this thing only a few short weeks later. How on earth were they planning on getting this thing in shape by then? But hey, Bethesda had never truly let down the core fan base. Technical flaws aside, they always seemed to deliver an enthralling, immersive adventure. Fallout 76 would prove, if nothing else, to be a worthwhile experience, right? Finally, on November 14th, 2018, Fallout 76 was released upon the world.
And everyone loved it. The end.
We've spent all of this time not talking about the good in a bad game. We haven't even gotten to the bad in a bad game yet. But Fallout is a big game that's part of a big series. And I think it's important to look back at everything that has been building up to this point. Despite all the time and energy Bethesda went into shutting down Interplay's online Fallout, suing anyone who could potentially tarnish their precious IP, the years of experience with this gameplay, help of other studios, throwing big stupid splashy shows that had Andrew WK screaming at confused nerds, and all the hype in the world, Fallout 76 turned out to not only be a bad game, but the worst reviewed AAA game released in 2018. To many, this wasn't just a dud. This was a betrayal of trust and loyalty. Yeah, join the club. The gameplay is an absolute mess. Sloppy gunplay and awkward melee action to ward off enemies that look like they're gliding across the ground as if the entirety of the Wasteland had been freshly waxed. Mundane missions that just sent you out on fetch quests, and you really don't get much that's noteworthy unless you stay on the main storyline. And I use that term loosely. The story is barely there. You're basically following the trail of the worst leader in the world, the overseer of your vault, as she runs across the map looking for missile silos and uncovering her past all at the same time. Even though the point of your vault was to restart society, so you do that by just popping open the vault and letting a bunch of hapless idiots scatter about while you leave them voicemails. That's how you reclaim the planet. This game looks and feels like Fallout 4, even though we were told this was a brand new experience built from the ground up. They just straight up lift character models from Fallout 4 and plop it into this game. They were using the same stupid engine that's been a chuggy mess for over a decade. It wasn't exactly cutting edge 3 years ago, and it certainly isn't the case today. It's not only like Fallout 4, but it actively plays worse than Fallout 4. There are some elements that flat out don't work in an always online multiplayer setting. They set out to make a multiplayer game that still felt desolate, still felt hostile. This is the apocalypse after all. They wanted every interaction with a new person to be tense, unsure of whether or not you can trust this stranger. At the same time, they also wanted to make the game completely playable for solo players. Make it still feel like the Fallout games they know and love. But these designs set up a lot of contradictory issues. On the single player side of things, since you're in an always online world, you have to deal with the problems that come with it. Gone are some key components that help coat over some of the annoyances of previous Bethesda Fallout games. You can still sleep to recover health, but unlike previous games that would jump forward in time, since you can't skip time for everybody else who's playing on your map, you just have to sit there and watch your character recover. And since you can't stop time, well, you can just say goodbye to VATS. It's still there, I just don't know why it is. Not to mention, you constantly have to keep an eye on your thirst and hunger levels, which used to be an optional mode for extra challenge, but here it's just mandatory, and it dips way too often. And it, of course, makes it a reason for you to constantly jump back onto your Pip-Boy screen. Since the world can no longer pause when you're twiddling around with your inventory, it's going to get you into a lot of trouble when you're trying to switch out a gun, ammo, armor, refill health, food, or drink. And yeah, you can hotkey onto a favorites wheel, but you're constantly having weapons break or run out of ammo, depleting health items, stat boosting chems, meaning you're going to constantly be swapping out weapons, chems, and food, leaving you to fill hotkeys on a pretty consistent basis, meaning you'll be in the inventory a lot, no matter how prepped you are. Early levels in Fallout games have always been a bit of a challenge, even with the ability to freeze time and play around with your arsenal. This stuff should get easier the more you level up. You figure out your favorite playstyles and get into a familiar pattern with how you deal with the world around you. But getting to those higher levels in 76 is an absolute chore, and playing by yourself is a lonely, boring, and repetitive experience. It doesn't help that the new leveling system is a confusing card system. Feels like I'm playing solitaire every time I try to figure out what perks I want to play around with. And I get why they had to switch some things around here. Obviously, some things won't work in this new playstyle, but this confusing layout looks like it was laying the groundwork for microtransactions. I'm complaining a lot from a single player perspective, and to be fair, that's how I played most of this game. There are some things that are elevated when you play with other people. But as a multiplayer experience, well, there are a lot of elements that don't mesh well here either. It's true they removed the traditional narrative, but if you want any of the lore while tromping around with others, you'll have to stop to read terminals, and in true Bethesda form, they give you a lot to read. Or you have to tell everybody in your party to shut up for a couple minutes while you listen to a holotape. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to force single players into constantly remaining online. You're rarely running into people as it is, and they're not intimidating since they barely chip away at health if they attack you unprovoked. And they certainly don't replace the narrative experience that companions and human AI gave you in previous games. Unless you're actively playing the game with friends, you're spending most of this time by yourself. The map is too big, the player count too low, and the threat level from other human players is next to nothing. What you will run into commonly are internet issues, because nothing quite immerses you in a post-apocalyptic wasteland like a steady Wi-Fi connection. Even if your internet is perfectly fine, something somewhere is screwing it up and will lock you out of controls or kick you out entirely. And oh man, we could keep going. All the nonsense with the nuke launches flat out not working after the new year hit, that developer room that uncovered a human NPC and loot boxes, or how power armor would turn you into a walking knife. And it doesn't stop in the game world. No. This mess spelled out into the real world. Bethesda not selling the game on Steam and forcing PC players into yet another account to sign up for, and then just make a mess out of the refunds. The game going on sale not even a month after release, and really, this game should be free. It's not worth $35. It's certainly not worth $60. And it absolutely isn't worth the $200 you had to spend to get the special edition. And even in that big dumb box of toys lies yet another controversy. It's time to talk about the bag. Along with the game itself, the Power Armor edition of the game came with a big dumb helmet that you would wear once for a selfie, here's mine, and never touch again. To be fair, it is adorable, has a light and a voice modulator, but it's really nothing we haven't seen for years on store shelves with those Stormtrooper helmets. This thing isn't worth $200. But that's not the only thing you get. You also get a map that glows in the dark, a bunch of little army men, a steelbook, and a cheap nylon bag. So what's the big deal? This isn't exactly out of the ordinary. Overpriced junk is pretty common with collector's editions, and idiots like myself gobble them up. The problem is with the bag. See, this wasn't originally advertised as a crappy nylon bag. This was supposed to be a canvas bag. They swapped out the materials without ever telling anybody. When a justifiably angry customer called Bethesda out on the nylon surprise, a rep with an unfortunate name responded with a pretentious little message. Due to the unavailability of materials, we had to switch to a nylon carrying case for Fallout 76 Power Armor Edition. We hope this doesn't prevent anyone from enjoying what we feel is one of our best collector's editions. As you can imagine, the community did not take well to that at all. So, Bethesda came back with an apology of 500 atoms, the imaginary in-game currency you can use to buy imaginary things in this video game. In real life, that's $5 US, which isn't even enough money to buy an imaginary bag with your imaginary money. To make matters worse, it turned out that canvas bags were created for influencers and YouTubers.
Hey there, Nick.
Oh God.
Looks like someone has a YouTube channel.
Just go away.
Did somebody want a canvas bag?
I mean, yeah, I did pre-order the collector's edition.
Oh, Nick, you silly boy. Look at that subscriber count. Canvas isn't for you.
But I actually bought the collector's edition.
I'm sorry, but canvas is a rare commodity. We only have enough for the people who can sell my game. Why spend millions on advertisers when you can just give people a canvas bag? It's crazy. You know how cheap and easy it is to make a canvas bag?
Look, to be fair, Bethesda did finally cave and promise to deliver canvas bags to anybody who proved they purchased a Power Armor edition of the game. But of course, that's not all. As it turns out, there was a bit of a hiccup in their system that exposed player data of anyone sending in a ticket for a replacement bag. Addresses, numbers, credit card info, and more was let loose onto the world just because people wanted to get the thing they were originally promised when they threw $200 down on a product that turned out to be a bust on multiple levels. It's crazy just how much has gone wrong with 76, and it's crazy that I haven't really spent that much time on any single issue. That stupid bag is just one of many problems. Trust me, we could create a full video series, and I'm sure some people already have. I've tried to condense what feels like a non-stop stream of issues since this game was launched in November. When it's showing up in gaming news, it's probably not good news. Fallout 76, once again, the worst reviewed AAA game of 2018. It's showing up at the top of plenty worst games of the year lists. This should have been an instant hit. They had everything they needed to make this work. Fallout Online had plenty of cool ideas. They had plenty of in-house help, certainly enough money and resources, and still this somehow feels like less of a game than Fallout 4. But at least it's still a better game than Jurassic Park Evolution, at least according to IGN. Good job, Dan.
Nick, buddy, you're sure spending a lot of time on these silly little mistakes. When are you gonna get to the good stuff?
I don't know, Todd. Stop screwing up your game so I can wrap this episode up.
You'll be hearing from my lawyer's peasant.
All right, let's get to it. Here's something you need to understand about me. I'm a weird guy. I have weird hobbies, one of which is exploring abandoned places. I don't know why, but I know I'm not alone in this fascination. As I've discovered a few years ago, there's a whole community behind this odd thing, and they've given it a name: urban exploring. In our modern world, there's not much we can do to find a real sense of adventure, mystery, or even some eerie supernatural feeling if you believe in that stuff. Urban exploring scratches that itch, as do video games of certain genres, and I think I speak for a lot of urban exploring gamers when I say that there are few game series that really match that hobby, like Bethesda's 3D Fallouts. And there is always something new to see on this map. It's huge and devoid of friendly life, but don't take that to mean there isn't something to see. This is not a boring landscape. The unique landmarks, references to real-life places in history, all of this is still as breathtaking to me as it always has been, and it remains my main draw to this franchise. Yes, I know, I've seen all the arguments explaining how great the characters are in the original games, and they are valid arguments and I absolutely miss them. But that's not what draws me to this world. I'm here for this world. And the fact of the matter is, well, 76 has an awesome map. It might very well be one of the best this team's put together. It's varied, it's huge, and it has tons of little spots to discover. Do I miss the story and characters? Absolutely. But apparently Bethesda has never done that great of a job with that stuff, so they left it behind to try something different. And honestly, that's a bit of a shame. I would have loved to see this map in a proper Fallout game, but this is not Fallout 5. This is something familiar, and certainly worse in many aspects, but it's still something different. Like a lot of other games you're going to see on the show, your enjoyment is going to depend a lot on your expectations and personal preferences. I have loved exploring 3D spaces in gaming since the days of Sega Saturn and PS1, and it's a lot of fun reading through all the new lore or piecing together the final days of people you never got to meet. And I love that a lot of these new monsters are based on urban legends in West Virginia. What an awesome way to appreciate and experience a real-world setting in a surreal way. And I know I'm not the only one who's fascinated with cryptozoology and urban myths. They wouldn't be killing it on YouTube if that wasn't the case. And I think these designs are pretty fantastic. This is the type of stuff I actively seek out in gaming because it's only in this medium do you actively interact on this level. It's not the most immersive experience, but it's better than most other means out there. How many of you knew what a snallygaster was before this game came out? When roaming on my own, and when the game is running fine, I do have a fun time exploring, looting, and building. It's fun to just zone out with some music or a podcast and really root around one of the many locations in this game. But like I stated before, this is a multiplayer game. And from what I see, that's when the game is at its best. I've seen people dismiss this point time and time again, saying that any game is better with more people, and somehow that doesn't apply to a game that's specifically built for multiplayer? Getting together with your friends to explore the Wasteland, taking on threats or other players? That sounds like a pretty fun time. The problem is, that's a very specific scenario, but if it's one you find yourself in, you might have a really good time. It certainly seems to be the case for many others. I have never known a fully online game to launch without issue. Some more than others, but underwhelming or flat out disastrous launches are unfortunately not uncommon. And considering how many games we play in early access and how a game can evolve well past launch, I came into this with a little more patience than I normally would allow. I've been plenty annoyed, as my poor friends could tell you, but more often than not, I've been having a good time. That's not to say I think people are wrong for being upset. Not at all. I spent a lot of time in this video talking about the history that led up to this insane mess for a good reason. I think just maybe it's also important to remember to chill out a little bit, not jump down the throats of people who are having a good time with this thing, because despite the flaws, I still find myself drawn back to this game. I still have a lot left to do, and I am rooting for this team to turn this mess around. I really am. I want to jump back in a few months from now and hopefully see a game a little closer to their original vision. I'm not happy with the release. I'm not happy with how they've handled themselves as a business, but if anybody's losing sleep over this game, honestly, it really should only be the people who have made this thing. And even then, I don't feel like they deserve that stress. You guys gotta remember, there are actual human beings who made this thing happen. There are so many people being harassed just because they made a game you didn't like. We can feel a little ripped off, and it's really easy to poke fun at figureheads.
At least I'm not Randy Pitchford.
But at the end of the day, you can turn off this game and carry on with your life. Honestly, I think we're going to get something worthwhile from this failed experiment down the road. So, do I recommend this game? Yeah, I can't recommend it. At least not at full price. And certainly not at this time. Like I said, I understand why people are still roaming around with their friends and finding plenty of fun. And maybe it's not as bad as it's made out to be, especially if they continue to patch and improve the thing. But as of right now, it's still a bad game. Over and over again, I hear people that were once excited for future Bethesda games now incredibly concerned. Todd keeps saying they're using new tech, but we keep running into the same issues over and over again in all of their games. And Fallout 76 is above and beyond the worst offender. Can we really trust Bethesda to make things right when many would argue they've never truly learned from their mistakes? Can they win the community back?
Of course we can. How do you think we've gotten away with pulling the same crap over and over all this time? Because you keep buying it. Joke about Skyrim's re-releases all you want. We'll stop pumping it out when you stop buying it. But you won't. You never will. All we have to do is work on this silly little game until it's somewhat functional, come out on stage and say, whoopsie, I'll say a couple more jokes in my expense, brush all of this off, and it'll be back to business as usual. With all you sheep back in line, waiting to give me money for the next digital junkyard for you to scrounge around in. No matter what broken garbage I spit out, people will eat it up. They will always be back. They will always kneel to God Howard.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe not.
Beg your pardon?
The gamer is a fickle beast, and Bethesda is no EA. They don't have that safe Madden crowd to rely on every year, and these games don't come out on a yearly basis. Even then, they don't make juggernaut sales like Rockstar does every time Red Dead or Grand Theft Auto drops. And keep in mind, Red Dead 2 came out only a short while before 76.
Who cares? Cowboys are for grandpas.
And the team who made arguably the best 3D Fallout is now owned by Microsoft. And it looks like they're putting out a game that's going to scratch that itch that 76 failed to relieve with Outer Worlds.
Yawn.
And let's not forget CD Projekt Red, who delivered the masterful Witcher 3 and has Cyberpunk just waiting in the wings.
Snore.
And of course, when it comes to open worlds, you have the likes of Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, which looks like it's going post-apocalyptic.
Get the legal team ready.
And Rage 2 is just around the corner.
Who cares about Rage 2?
Well, you probably should, Todd. Bethesda's publishing this one.
Oh yeah, that's right. Be sure to pick up another copy of Skyrim.
My point is that Bethesda may have a strong brand and a large fan base, large enough that 76 was the 4th best-selling game last November, but those numbers won't stay high forever. Not in a world full of better options. Not in a world where you can just pick up the latest port of Skyrim and play it again.
Coming soon to the Pip-Boy.
Look, at the end of the day, this story is not over. I'm just hoping for a happy ending. There's a lot of stupid mistakes, and again, this is objectively a bad game. It's tough to talk about current games on the show, because there are still people going to work every day trying to rein in this mess, all while dealing with the absurd rage of the internet. And at the same time, I can't exactly condone bad business practices that pushed a product like this out the door. I'm sorry if this video is giving you a mixed message. It's because I have mixed feelings. I'm sorry if you're coming in expecting me to come to the full defense of this game, but I can't dismiss a bad game either. I told you what I liked. I hopefully touched on why other people like this game, and right now, I don't know. I wasn't jonesing for a new Fallout. I didn't have high hopes for this game, and I'm willing to be patient. Take a step back and see what things look like a year from now. Gaming is now a place where a title can be a completely different experience depending on when you play the game. They're going to continue to work on this, and they'll continue to improve. So for now, I'm closing up Vault 76. And the next time I come to visit, maybe we'll see something really worthwhile. And even in the end, if this ends up being a bust, even if it's too little too late, I certainly hope Bethesda has learned from their mistakes for the next time this series or any of their games roll around. Hopefully, this was a wake-up call, because in order to survive this Fallout has to change. Toot toot, Vault Dwellers.